Salamikum, welcome to Questions on British Muslim TV with me, Mohammed Shafiq. We're broadcasting Sky Channel 752 and across social media at British Muslim TV, live from our studios here in Wakefield. Wherever you are joining us, a very warm welcome. We want you to comment on the stories we're covering tonight. So you can call us now on 01924231083, or you can message us on the WhatsApp number, which is on your screen there, 07585835150. And if you're watching us on Facebook Live, very warm welcome. Post your comments and we'll share some of them on the air shortly. Now, as US and NATO troops have now left Afghanistan for the final time yesterday, the Taliban have taken over the airport and are now in talks with the Turkish and Qatari governments to get technical support to run the airport. Qatari technical teams have already arrived at the airport this afternoon. The Taliban have promised the international community that they will allow foreign nationals and those with a visa to leave Afghanistan safely after over 90 countries wrote to the Taliban requesting them to. The Afghan branch of the Islamic State, known as the Islamic State Khorasan province, said it was behind an attempted rocket attack on Kabul's airport on Monday. They claim it was successful, but American military sources said they had intercepted the rockets. Now, this follows the suicide bombing at the airport on Thursday, with over 170 people killed, with 200 injured, of which 13 US soldiers were killed. The US military is investigating after at least 9 Afghan civilians were reportedly killed in a US drone strike on Sunday, which aimed to prevent a further attack on the airport. Now, over 15,000 people were evacuated by British military forces, including 2,100 children. They're now in quarantine in the UK. And for those Afghan refugees, they will be placed in temporary accommodation. There are 800 and 1,100 Afghans eligible to enter the UK, still stuck in Afghanistan, along with 150 British citizens who weren't able to get out to the airport. Now, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has said they're working with the neighbours of Afghanistan to get them safely. And this afternoon, in the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Foreign Secretary announced that he would be going to the region tonight, with his first stop being Pakistan, which is obviously a key ally of the United Kingdom, but also neighbour of Afghanistan. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk to our very special guest about these issues, but more importantly about how he sees the future. And then in the second part of the programme, we talk to the author, Shereen, who is going to be joining us. But let me just give you those questions before we go to our guests. Questions are, what now for Afghanistan as the Taliban strengthen their hold and are now thinking about forming a government? How can we welcome refugees to the UK from Afghanistan? And what should you and me do to help them make them feel at home? And the final question, how will writing novels and fiction help elevate the struggle of the Palestinian cause? Really excited to talk to my guest, Shireen Malherbe. That's her name. My apologies for that. The acclaimed Palestinian author, British Palestinian author from Leicester. Okay, let's start with our first guest. When the US and international forces invaded Afghanistan following the September 11th terrorist attacks, thousands tried to fear the violence for a much better, safe and future. Now, Dr. Waheed Arian is one such person. Along with his family, he fled to Pakistan and then arrived here in the UK, age 15, with only $100 in his pocket. Now, as a refugee, he studied hard, worked and excelled in his A-levels. He applied to attend Cambridge University, got a place. He graduated in 2006 and continued his medical studies in London. He's now a senior doctor in Liverpool radiology and emergency specialist. And his story is an amazingly inspiring story. He made the impossible possible. I'm really honoured to have him on British Muslim TV. Dr. Waheed Arian lives in Liverpool. He's joining us live from there. Dr. Waheed Arian, a very warm welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a busy few days for you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Okay, let's go with the first question. How have you coped over these last 18 months during the pandemic, serving on the front line in the NHS, as well as protecting yourself and your family?
Well, it's been an honour for me to be able to serve on the front line in the NHS, along with many other colleagues, some of them immigrants, some of them ex-refugees, current refugees, and many who were born here in the UK. It just shows that wherever we come from, when we are standing up to a problem that's facing the nation. We can stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, regardless of our background, regardless of our religions, regardless of our beliefs, just to be able to serve, help each other, and to serve the community. And I think that's, in a way, boils down the humanity of how we have been able to not only stand up to the pandemic in the health sector, but in many other sectors as well, whether it's key workers we're talking about at school, whether it's key workers just on the shop floor. They've all come together to stand shoulder to shoulder. And I've been one of them to be able to, and traumatic for myself to see so many patients coming in, being ill, not being able to help some of them. Because usually as an emergency medicine doctor, we see almost every case. And most of the time we know what's wrong and what medication to give. But at the start of the pandemic, we didn't know what we were dealing with and how to treat these patients. So that was really terrifying for us as well, what to do. And then to lose a couple of colleagues as well to the pandemic, that was really heartbreaking. But then to see the effects of pandemic on a global scale in areas or countries where our charity operates, for example, the Arian charity operates in Afghanistan, in Syria, in parts of Africa, which I lead. It connects doctors from the NHS and across the world to doctors in these countries by giving advice on smartphones. We have been able to help colleagues on the ground, but it also has shown to us how much lack of resources there is in those areas. Many of them have been reusing PPEs for 10 days. You know, this PPE is only to be used once, but in some of the hospitals in Afghanistan, they, throughout the pandemic, they've used it for 10 days in a row because they didn't have a choice. That just gives you one example, or sharing one ventilator for 100 bed. So it's really heartbreaking in that sense.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Inequality of the vaccine, on the other hand.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about vaccinating our teenagers, but back in many low-resource countries, they have no vaccine.
Yeah, they're struggling with the vaccine. And I know it's something that we want to talk to you about, your book, but also current situation as we find ourselves in Afghanistan, as we were saying, top of the program. Just tell us a bit about that journey that you took. Sort of, you know, civil war breaks out, September 11th happens, military strikes, and you flee to Pakistan, Peshawar, the city of Peshawar, before you end up in the UK. Tell us a bit about that journey.
I was born in 1983 during the Afghan-Soviet conflicts. The first 5 years I spent in cellars hiding from the daily rockets, the bombs, along with my family members. Two happy memories was one being taken to a local bar park by my mother to have an ice cream with my cousins, and another one was when my father kneeled down in a military uniform to give me a kite. But the rest is all ravaged by war. Aged 5, we went to Pakistan as refugees, like millions of other people went. We settled in a refugee camp where the conditions were absolutely inhumane. Most of us got malaria. I also contracted tuberculosis that nearly killed me. But that's what also inspired me to become a doctor. I saw firsthand the power of healing. On the other hand, I saw so much misery. So that was the seed of inspiration that was planted in me from younger age. Aged 8, we came back to Afghanistan in 91. In 92, the Civil War broke out, which was a street-by-street fight because of which people had to flee their homes, belongings, everything, overstepping dead bodies, going through gutters, dodging bullets and rockets in the sky, just to be safe. And again, we stayed in cellars for 4 years. Most of my education happened in cellars because schools were destroyed, hospitals were destroyed. These are the terrifying moments that people now remember, now with the new change, that they don't want the country to go back in that direction. In 96, the Taliban took over. Sadly, the country was very isolated. The economy crumbled to the extent that my father was driving a taxi for 6 months just to be able to afford a sack of rice. In 99, when I was 15 years old, I was at an age that I could have been taken to serve at the military, and my life was at risk and I didn't have any future. So that's when my parents sent me away, sold everything they had, put it in the hands of an agent to smuggle me out of the country. So in 99, actually before the 2001 invasion, I came on my own to the UK, age 15, leaving my family behind with hardly any education and $100, which I landed here in the UK.
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating story of somebody who, born in Afghanistan, grew up in that civil war element and then ends up at Cambridge. We've got a caller. Let's say hello to the caller, and then we're going to take a quick break and then talk a bit about Cambridge and then your book as well, because really powerful book. Let's go to the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. I have one question for the journalist and the media media of the world, that there is big explosion like for like Afghanistan future and Afghanistan's situation, but in whole Muslim world there are rulers who snatch their rights, snatch their wealth, everything from them, and they rule as like pharaohs and Yazids. Nobody discuss those things, that whole nation suffering, and they take all the wealth from the whole country, and how they rule in Muslim countries. Nobody discuss about this. But in Afghanistan, everybody, there were 11 countries destroyed, Muslim countries, and nobody called them terrorists. And now,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're running out of time because we need to get to a break. But I just wanted to bring you in there, Dr. Waheed. The sense of Afghanistan, this great country, great tradition, great history repeating itself now with the Taliban back in power.
Sadly, it is. Afghanistan is an amazing country, very beautiful, very hospitable people. Despite me spending my 15 years of my childhood in war, I still have a lot of memories of compassion that was shown to me by people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Yeah, so that they always kept me going. They kept giving me hope despite having so many mental trauma for it as well. On the other hand, actually, because of the instability and security, the country has also been ravaged by corruption, by many people who come in from the Western world, actually, to exploit. So I do agree in that sense that, sadly, that instability and security, whether it's in Afghanistan or elsewhere.
Okay. Sorry, Dr. Waheed, I'm just going to stop you there. We've got about seconds before our break. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with our special guest, Dr. Waheed Arian. Join us on the other side of these important messages. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. My special guest is Dr. Waheed Arian. Fascinating story. We were talking just before the break about that sense of corruption, endemic corruption, not just in Afghanistan, but also within the international community. You find yourself graduating from Cambridge, you're serving in the NHS, but your life is still, your mind is still back to Afghanistan, and you wanted to make a difference. And you went and set up this charity that you referred to. Tell us a bit about Arian Teleheal. What is telemedicine, and what's the vision behind the charity?
So before I got to founding the charity, when I was in 99, when I came to the UK, what I brought with me was that hope for safety and that dream to become a doctor so I could give back. I had no education, but the kindness that was shown to me here by the British people that allowed me to use my determination on one hand and the opportunities in front of me, working 3 jobs and studying at night time, to ultimately get to Cambridge University and also study at Harvard and Imperial College. And I became a doctor in 2010. So for me, always giving was something that was planted in me from childhood. And as soon as I started giving on the front line in the NHS, I started feeling better. I had brought scars of conflict with me in form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and my symptoms started settling as soon as I was working more in the NHS. And then I soon turned my attention to giving back in Afghanistan. So I kept going back and forth as much as I could on my own for the first 5 years. And then I also realized that there were many other people in the UK, my colleagues in the NHS, who also wanted to give, to help, but they didn't know how to go to conflict zone. They couldn't because of security and many other logistical issues. So that's when I came across telemedicine, which is giving advice online from one doctor to a patient or from one doctor to another doctor. And I thought that we could adapt this, actually put it on a smartphone and use it in Afghanistan. And that's when I founded Arian, a pioneering international award-winning international charity that connects doctors from the NHS and across the world to doctors in Afghanistan. It went from serving 5 hospitals in 2015 to throughout the country operative in 2016. And we've also been active in Syria, as well as in parts of Africa. And lately, we've also went to India. Over the pandemic, we have been helping through collaborating with an organization called British Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. And they brought in 650 volunteers of their own, using the innovative template that we have to work together to serve. And it just brings it back home in a way that the whole purpose for me of living is love and kindness from family and friends, and secondly, to be able to be of service to people, regardless of the religion, regardless of the background. And that charity is a medium for me to discharge that dream of mine.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that with the Taliban taking control of Afghanistan, how will your work change in Afghanistan?
That's a good question. I think so far we have been connected. We have still been working in Afghanistan through our charity because we're directly connected with the doctors throughout. They still keep sending us cases, and I hope that will continue. Our work is purely humanitarian. It's non-political, it's non-religious, and also it's not-for-profit. So I hope that the Taliban will abide by their promises that they've done. They've said that they will allow the non-profit organizations, the aid organizations to continue serving. In fact, Afghanistan is going through a humanitarian crisis now. So for that reason, there are tens of thousands of people who are displaced. They lack food, shelter, medicine, and they desperately need aid, which I've been appealing throughout my media interviews, is to push for that humanitarian aid and to differentiate engaging with the Taliban on the humanitarian front versus the political front, which I think a lot of the politicians seem to confuse. By holding, for example, budget or aid, they think they could have a leverage over Taliban. That's incorrect. It's actually that's a leverage over people. Yeah. We have to be very careful not to hurt people who are already dying from so many causes. 15 million people are in poverty in the country. Many of them are women and children. So they are in an extremely desperate situation, and my heart goes to every single one of them. And we should be helping in any way we can. Any charities that are operating inside Afghanistan, our charity is one of them, but there are many others who are providing aid, food, shelter, and so on, such as the UN Refugee Agency, International Rescue Committee, Afghan Aid. People hopefully should be able to support them, as well as the refugees who come here. Yeah. Many of the refugees who come here, they have left everything behind, their homes, families. They bring in hope and dreams the same way as I brought my own dream. We should look at them as human beings with fathers, mothers, sisters who have potential. First of all, if we give them their human rights safety and allow them to realize their potential, they will also be able to contribute to the society that I've been giving since 2010.
Yeah, and then you wrote a book about your journey. The book's called In the Wars, A Story of Conflict, Survival and Saving Lives. I mean, that, in a sense, the title summarizes your life, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And the reason why I wrote In the Wars is to be able to inform people of the realities of conflict, what happens to people, the physical and mental traumas that people suffer, the traumatic memories when they bring, how they can help some people to do better in life in a way that to give, to become kinder, to be more compassionate. And that's not just my story, a story of so many refugees, that they have had so much suffering that they want to help when they make it somewhere safe and where they can realize their potential. And ultimately, many people, when they come together, so through my journey, through the journey of Arian charity, through philanthropy, it's when so many people come together, you can actually address global problems. One person can do so much, but it's actually collectively, if we all come together, we can actually make a huge difference in the world. And of course, I've used innovation, I've used simple technology as well, and that I've introduced that in my book. But mainly it's about my journey in Afghanistan, coming here, going through all the hardships that refugees go through in Afghanistan and here, and how not to give up. And that's the final message through my book, is that never to give up on your hopes and dreams, despite going through adversity and after adversity.
Yeah, because in a sense, if you read the book, as I've been doing over the last few days in preparation for this interview, I think that's the message I get. I mean, how could somebody... Because when you think about Cambridge and Oxford, Dr. Waheed, it's very much establishment. It's very much upper class people. And a refugee from Afghanistan, you know, making that transition and you know, graduate from Cambridge is a phenomenal story of success.
But mine is not alone. I think this is where I hope that my book gives that impression as well, that
Inshallah.
I've been hoping to give that impression that humans, they have potential. They have potential. On one hand, they shouldn't give up. They should be determined to pursue their dreams. But on the other hand, it's equally society's role. Each one of us, when we are in a position to show compassion, we should give compassion to people, allow them to flourish their dreams. We'll be seeing many refugees from Afghanistan coming on from other countries. The next time we see them in their face, even they're struggling with their English the same way as I was, or they're struggling to adapt or not understanding the new environment, we should let them settle. And once we've allowed them to settle, slowly they will realize their potential. And later on, you will see many more Dr. Arians or engineers or shop drivers. We all, no matter what we do in life, we do bring in something useful to the society. And that's what I see in people throughout in my life here in the UK and abroad.
And when you look back at your life and your journey, what do you learn about yourself?
What have I learned about myself? On one hand, that humans can be so fragile. What even 2 decades later, that the recent events have broken me down so many times. I've cried. Despite me being away, thousands of miles away from Afghanistan with a loving family and safety here, I've got a lovely job, recognition and everything, but still, those memories haunt me. The conflict haunt me, and it's just that human suffering never goes away. And now I feel for other people who are suffering equally. So it just shows me how human beings can be so fragile. And on the other hand, I see that human beings can be so determined that they could have a steel-like determination as well. And hopefully my life has shown both sides of that in some way. That you can actually, on one hand, be so vulnerable. And I think we should allow ourselves to be vulnerable because that's how we connect to each other. It's actually the empathy that connects us. It's the suffering of each other. And also, on the other hand, the celebration of each other. And that is extremely important because on our own, there's so much we can do. We can have an amazing life, amazing job on our own. But if we don't have an ultimate aim of something useful that we can give to the society, I think that life is not as meaningful as it could be if we have that ultimate vision for the better of humanity.
I've got one final question, sir. Well, a couple of questions. One is, how does it practically work now that we've seen foreign forces, the American and the British, now talking to the Taliban about helping refugees leave Afghanistan? How does it work for a charity like yourself? Would you be starting those conversations with the Taliban to kind of get their reassurance that they support the work that you do on the ground?
Sure. As I alluded earlier, it's very important to differentiate that humanitarian engagement versus political engagement, because we have no choice here. The people are suffering. There's so many people are suffering on the ground from the lack of basic living necessities. And if we don't intervene, most of them will die, and a lot of them will be children and women. So hence, we have to really act urgently, develop a package of aid. The international community needs to come together. The aid organization, again, mine is just one organization, one of so many. We need to engage. We need to have a roadmap, and hopefully the government will establish that roadmap for us. We're a registered charity. Of course, we have to abide by the governance. We have to make sure that our engagement is in a legal way, in a way that it indemnifies us, in a way that it protects us as well. So that's an obligation. But on the other hand, we can't spend a very long time waiting for that to see if there is some sort of government or if they give so many assurances. Otherwise, people will die. So hence I've got a lot of urgency in my messages to the government, which I have been saying throughout the past few days and weeks, that ultimately using any leverage when it comes to donation, aids, and so on, that's not a leverage. That's leverage against the people, not actually against the Taliban. So that engagement needs to happen, and that has to be led by the government and international community first and foremost.
Yeah, well, we know that the book in the Wars, A Story of Conflict, Survival and Saving Lives is available now at most bookshops, and you can order that online as well. It's a fascinating story, and I would really encourage you to read it. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll start our conversation with our next guest. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Don't go anywhere. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, wherever you are around the world. A very warm welcome. My final question, sir, what does the future hold for you, Dr. Waheed?
So for me, all my life, I've hung on to hope, despite not having any hope when I was growing up in Afghanistan, despite seeing rockets and bombs. I never give up on hope. I was hoping that the next day will be better. And that's what kept me going. And I'm advocating hope really strongly to other people who are caught in conflict, or they have made it out and they're going through some other sort of adversity, whether in the UK, US, or anywhere else, to not give up on hope that there will be a better day in the future. Of course, there are many problems on the ground. There are many issues, but it's very easy to give up. And I hope that most of us will not give up on the humanity, and to be able to even find a way to serve, whether it's 1% or 2% or 0.1% or 0.5%. I will take it anytime, and I hope that other people will agree with that as well, to not give up on humanity.
Well, thank you so much. I know it's a fascinating story. I've read a few chapters already. I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. Keep safe, and love to the family.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that you are safe, and everybody who is listening, tuning in, they are safe as well.
Thank you so much. That does Dr. Waheed Arian, the Afghan refugee who came to the UK. What a fascinating story. Imagine coming to the UK, leaving your family at 15, and then working, and then also studying, smashing his A-levels, and then ending up in Cambridge. Yes, Cambridge University, and now serving on the front line in the NHS, but also got his charity helping the needy people around the world. What a fascinating story. As I said, that book is available at bookshops, so I'd encourage you to have a read, because it's a fascinating story. In the Wars, A Story of Conflict, Survival and Saving Lives. Now, after the break, we have another acclaimed British Palestinian author and novelist, Shireen Malherbe, and she's from Leicester, and she's wrote lots of books, and she'll be joining us to talk about her story, her novels, and her experiences as a British Palestinian. Obviously, Palestine and Gaza have been in the news these past few months, and that is obviously an issue which still concerns many people on the international community. And then we've got a situation in Afghanistan. As you know, yesterday, or on Monday, should we say, the troops, American troops, finally left Afghanistan and Kabul airport. And obviously that situation is still tense. Tonight, the Qatari government have sent technical experts to the airport, wanting to secure it, but to try to get it up and running so that international flights can start again. What a fascinating story with our previous guest. Now, last week we heard that the British government had kept Pakistan in the red list once again, which has caused deep anger and frustration amongst British Pakistanis who are stranded in Pakistan, and those in the UK who are unable to, and who are, let me put my teeth back in, who are unable to travel to visit family. Now, there was hope that they could go into the amber list, but this did not happen. So what is the reality of the decision making? Tim White, an expert who's our guest next week, has said with cases rising in Pakistan in the 3 weeks before the announcement, it was the right decision to keep in red. But before last Thursday, he said it was 60-40% to come out. Now, the Pakistani government is sharing data with the British government now, has been praised for its response by the World Health Organization, and the Pakistani government is accusing British government of politics and economics. Now, this viewpoint is rejected by the British Junior Health Minister, Lord Bethell, who in a letter to the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, Yasmin Qureshi, said that the low amount of testing in Pakistan indicated a high level of positive cases, which are underreported. Now, secondly, he says the sequencing meant it's not possible to know the full genomic makeup of Pakistan's current wave. Now, the next review is scheduled for Thursday, the 16th of September. And here at British Muslim TV, we'll keep an eye on things. The developments included Dominic Raab, who tonight is travelling to Pakistan. We'll see whether that has an impact. And now in other news, Manchester United have announced the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo from Juventus for a transfer fee of around £20 million. He'll earn around £480,000 a week and returns to Old Trafford after a 12-year absence in where he played for Real Madrid and Juventus. Ronaldo could potentially make his Manchester United debut against Newcastle on Sunday, the 11th of September, after the international break at home at Old Trafford, where you can expect a very, very warm welcome for him. Okay, so let's move on to our second topic. Now, Shireen Malherbe is a British Palestinian writer. She's an English literature graduate. Her first book, Jasmine Falling, has been voted in the top 20 best books for Muslim women, by Muslim women. Her second novel, The Tower, was published by Beacon's Book in April 2019. And her latest book, which we'll learn more about, titled The Land Beneath the Light, which is out very soon. She studied the representation of Muslim women in the media, and I'm really pleased to say she's joining us live now from Leicester. Welcome to the program, Shireen Salamikum. It's great to have you on.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Let's start on, how are you and your family coping during these last 18 months or so during this pandemic?
Well, I think it's teaching everybody patience and to be more grateful. We have 4 children at home, so I was also a teacher, so that was fun.
Yeah, so you're sort of multitasking between being a novelist and also doing the teaching.
Yes, exactly.
Which takes a lot of patience, if I can recall from my time with my children, my 4 daughters who were at home during this pandemic. Very busy household, very little silence in the house.
Yes, that's very true. I was asked recently, actually, how I even managed to write with 4 children. But they're one of the reasons that I do write. So it makes it that little bit easier. I think you have to be really passionate about what you do, and then you have to dedicate some time to it and carve it out. And that's the only way really it works. And most of the time I write furiously because I'm very passionate about things. Yeah. And I think that's the drive that gets me through, actually.
Yeah. And then when you write, do you write pretty much solid for a month to get the book done, or do you do bits and bats as when you can fit it in?
It's a really good question, actually, about technique. I work on the first draft over a matter of weeks until it's finished, building up to a word count of about 60,000 words to 80,000, and then take a break for a couple of months and then go back to it and start all over again.
Yeah, and we've got lots of questions coming through for you because lots of people knew you were coming. So lots of aspiring writers who want to learn more about the book. We'll go through some of those questions in the second part of the program. Let's just talk about your upbringing. Where were you born? What was your childhood like? Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in the UK, and I didn't actually know a great deal about Palestine as I was growing up, and that journey really began when I was in my 20s. So very much born and raised in the UK, went to school here, and really only started to discover my Palestinian heritage after I left my banking career in my early 20s. My husband and I went traveling around the Middle East and stayed with my family in Palestine. And that was really the first sort of journey to discover that side of my heritage. So pretty, I'd say, good upbringing, and I've always written. I always enjoyed school and was very academic, but I didn't really think you could make a career from writing. So I went into banking, and
as you do.
Yes, and I did enjoy it. I went from sort of a small farming branch to strategy in Canary Wharf, and just decided that it wasn't really for me. So when my husband and I got married, we decided to go traveling. And that's when I sort of embarked on my personal journey to say I'm going to become a writer. And that's when it all changed.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. As I said, we've got lots of questions coming through on the text as well. So if you want to share your questions with Shireen, 01924231083 lines are open now. WhatsApp number is there on the screen as well, so please do get in touch. And if you're watching this on Facebook Live or across various social media platforms, please just post your comment or your question. I promise we'll get through some of them very, very shortly. Just very quickly, we've got a quick break to get to Shireen. What did you learn about yourself when you were growing up, when you look back at that period of your life?
I think naturally you know where your talent lies. And I think sometimes the pull for a career, especially with school, can be sort of the deciding factor about what you get into. But looking back, as always with hindsight, I felt that I couldn't make the career I wanted from writing. But looking back, I'd say, use the talents that you've got, because if you do something that you love, you're more likely to be successful at it. So my big learning curve was to pick writing back up. And after a long break, it took a bit longer than I expected, actually.
Just reflecting before the break about her upbringing and childhood, and just tell us, where did that interest come in terms of wanting to be a writer?
I did actually write when I was at school. I remember actually appearing in papers for my poetry competitions. I was only reminded actually when it was pulled out of the loft recently. And surprisingly, the subjects are quite similar, so that's interesting. And at 13, I was actually offered a contract with Penguin Publishers for an anthology. But at 13, I needed 15 poems. And at the time, I just felt like it was too much. So I actually didn't go ahead with it. So it's always been something that I've loved and always done. But I think it comes to that time when you're leaving college where you're thinking, what's next? And yes, it just became a pull, I suppose, between a career in finance or writing. And I'd always really seen writing as something that I did because I really loved it, as opposed to something that I wanted to base my career around.
Yeah. And then are writers generally people who love to read as well, read other books?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my mum said when I was growing up that she often found me in my bedroom reading books, and she actually said to one of her friends, "Is this?"
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to take a very quick break. It's fascinating. I love listening to stories about people's upbringings and sort of the reflection. And it usually, Shireen throws people when I ask that question. What did you learn about yourself as you were growing up, looking back? So you've done really well. Maybe that sort of writing, being a writer kind of helped with you with that. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the very important conversation. As I said, we'll get through some of your questions and your comments, but more importantly, we'll hear from our guest. The number 01924231083. Don't go anywhere. We're waiting for you. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. My special guest is Shireen Malherbe, the British Palestinian author and novelist.
Normal. I mean, Shireen's in her room all the time reading books, and
it kind of makes a change, doesn't it, from kids nowadays who sit in their rooms on their computer games and their smartphones.
Exactly, yeah, and that's what my mum's friend actually said. She said, well, if she was on a computer, you wouldn't mind. So yeah, I think it is just natural that if you read a lot, I don't think it can happen the other way around. I don't think you can write without reading. And I think your interest in books has to be a real passion, because they're very long projects, and the end result of a novel isn't always what you'd expect. So it has to be another driver. There has to be something else behind your writing that pushes you to want to create. And if you have that and you discover what that is for yourself as an individual, then I think that really is the key to success. There's a very classic book translated from Arabic, Don't Be Sad. I'm sure you and some of the listeners have heard of it. And it has an analogy about a tree. For an olive tree, you plant yourself in soil that's suitable for an olive tree. A lemon tree wouldn't survive in the same environment. An orange tree wouldn't. And it was an analogy for what your soul sort of inclines to do. And I thought that was really poignant, because I think all of us have something unique about us, talents, whether it's art, calligraphy, writing, journalism, reporting, being a doctor. And I think if we discover what that is and we actually go with what we're inclined to do, make for happier people and perhaps more success in what you're choosing to do.
Yeah, and was there a deliberate approach from you to kind of concentrate on novel and fiction rather than doing, writing about biographies, or I don't know, become a writer and an author?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there are so many ways of writing. And what happened with my first novel is, when I was in Palestine, I was staying in Ariha, which is Jericho, with my dad's family. And me and my husband went around with these notebooks, and we were just collecting all my family's stories. It was incredible. We learned so much from being there. So I ended up with a stack of notebooks of all these stories. And I looked at the literature that's out between the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict and the non-fiction. And a lot of my cousins in Palestine are journalists, and they're doing amazing jobs. And I just felt that for me, my medium was fiction. And that was because if you want to read about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there are many academic essays and books, but an audience that perhaps wouldn't pick those up may read fiction. And fiction has a particular structure where you can weave your stories into it. It can be optimistic, it can be realistic, but it can also sort of have a level of reality that you could almost want to create some hopefulness. And I wanted to use that because I really wanted to open up this world to a wide-ranging audience. And so for me, it was a natural transition to go to putting that into a fiction novel. And that's how I actually began my debut novel, Jasmine Falling.
Yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can do so now. And our lines are open, 01924 231-083. I've got a list of questions here. Yeah, we'll get through some of them throughout the programme. And then when you look at what's happening in Palestine, you obviously your family's from the West Bank, but what we saw in Gaza recently, how does that make you feel about the violence, the killing of children, just the suffering which has gone on for decades?
I mean, it's happening all over at the moment, and it's all over the world. And of course, you asked how it was during the last 18 months, and I think the inability to travel, to see family, to spend time with them, made it even more intense. There's these stories coming out of Palestine. My cousins were recently imprisoned after the Gaza war, after the bombing on Gaza recently. And you think, what can you do? What can you do? When I was there last time, we were staying in a rural village just outside of Ramallah in one of my family's houses, and a young boy was shot at the border. And at the time, I couldn't believe, coming from the UK, not really understanding much about the occupation, how a young boy could be shot at the border and nothing can happen. There's no Palestinian police. There's no sort of earthly justice. It is an event that happens so often that it doesn't even make the news anymore, doesn't make media, and it happens almost on a weekly basis where children are shot on the border. And as I said when we opened the interview, I write furiously because I believe these quieter events that pass, they need to be told in a way that creates emotion. And that's why these stories run throughout my books. In the latest novel, The Land Beneath the Light, that explores that as well. Because when something like that happens, you feel that people should know what's happening. And also, for me personally, it's, as you said, what can you do? What can you do to affect change? And I think the beauty of being able to write and having a platform to share that writing is actually to humanize people behind the headlines. It's to take a look at something from a different perspective that maybe not be in the media.
Yeah, so I'm just really reflecting on myself, that when you see the media coverage, particularly in Western media coverage, you're able to hear about the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers or Israelis who've been killed. Their names are used. But when you look at the Palestinian sides, generally, very rarely do you see the names of the Palestinian victims, and they're just seen as another number or statistic.
Yes, I mean, I've just been published in World Literature Today, which is a magazine that's published worldwide, and they've just done Palestinian stories. And one of the stories in there reflected on this and the use of sort of bodies by Sahar. Mustafa, I'll get her details. And, you know, it was that reflection on there being sort of no dignity. Now, with no names reported, there are news sites that you can follow. And as I said, my cousins are journalists there that do really fight to get a different narrative out there. But, you know, that's why it particularly interests me to capture it in a more emotive way. So I use the vehicle of fiction to do that, because I really believe that to get behind the media stories, you need to feel and empathise with people to truly understand what's happening.
And when you talk to your family in the West Bank in particular, do you sense that they feel as if sort of Western media dehumanise them and their story and their struggle and their history?
I mean, because they predominantly speak Arabic and there are lots of Arabic news content, I'm not sure how exactly they'd feel about it. But also another side to Palestine that people don't necessarily see, and it's something I explore in my books, there is life there. So, okay, they're living in incredibly tough circumstances, but, you know, there's life, there's hope. You know, people are getting married, they're having babies, they have a future ahead of them. And it's this sort of optimism and this hopefulness that I think we should also be focusing on, as well as the difficulties of life under occupation. There is also this other side that people don't see, and I'm particularly interested in exploring.
Yeah, and let's talk about that latest book. You, as I said in the intro, it's titled The Land Beneath the Light. Tell us more about the story and why you wanted to write it.
Okay, so The Land Beneath the Light is my third novel. I've done a migrant children's range as well, which also focuses on Palestine. But for The Land Beneath the Light, so it's just actually, we've just launched a cover reveal tonight, and it's a Palestinian reimagining of Jane Eyre. So the book summary, I'm going to read it for the listeners. From her rural farmhouse at the bottom of the hilltop, surrounded by the occupation, Khadija's life changes forever when the shadows descend, causing destruction in her village. In the wake of upheaval and ruin, Khadija draws upon her deeply rooted Palestinian heritage and stories to discover a life she has always dreamed of. A classic coming-of-age novel, The Land Beneath the Light explores the lived reality of those living under occupation in Palestine. So the story follows a young girl and her growth into adulthood. Now, what sort of was the push to write this was the village that I stayed at in my family's house, in the rural village. It's very hard to find them on satellites. You'll find that Palestinian towns and villages are being erased from the maps. And the idea that this village exists and my family's living there, and that's where the boy was shot at the border, doesn't even appear if you want to research it or look into it. And that really was sort of the catalyst for me beginning a novel to explore these sort of lesser known lives and villages in Palestine. And because I've stayed there, it really gave me a grounding to feel the setting as well. And it's quite common of Palestinian villages throughout the West Bank.
Yeah, really powerful story there. A couple of people on Facebook are saying, I don't look like a reader. I don't know what a reader looks like. But yeah, I love reading. And I think when I was a lot younger, Shireen, I used to read lots, because there wasn't mobile phones, there wasn't YouTube, I don't know, particularly when I was growing up. And so, you know, being able to kind of get yourself in books, read a book, I found fascinating. And up until about a year ago, I had loads of books until my wife told me to get rid of them. So, yeah,
no.
that's a different story.
And how many of these books did you read? Did you feel had Muslim characters reflected in them?
So I read lots of biographies, lots of biography books and a lot of history books. But yeah, I would probably think, yeah, unless the author was Muslim or from a BME background, that might make a difference. Okay, we're going to pause there. It sounds like Shireen's interviewing me, putting me in the spotlight. Now on Facebook, there's a conversation going on about whether Mohammed Shafiq, reads books. I know, surprised. But anyway, David Nolan, if you're still watching, yes, I do read. I read lots of books, and I might make the odd occasional grammatical error on my post, but hey, that's normal, isn't it? Anyway, if you want reading a book competition with me, David, we can certainly arrange that. Shahid Latif says, so let me say, he says, Shereen, what an incredible lady you are. So proud of you. Stay strong, and let's all pray that we can achieve something better for Muslim suffering. And he says, I've never been into reading. It's very hard to discover your IQ. That's not what you wish. But we'll return to normal service after the break, and we'll take more of your calls on 01924 231 083. And I'll get through some of those Facebook comments, the nice ones anyway. Join us at the side of this. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. Anyway, but there's a sense of, you know, when you look at, as you were talking to me, trying to sort of question me before the break, there's a sense of that representation not being there in terms of authors, you know, the Turner Prize and all these award ceremonies that you see. In terms of gender equality, we've made the progress. But when it comes to BME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic authors, that representation isn't there just yet.
No, I mean, I think we have a very long way to go, and Britain is, you know, very diverse. So just by including a few BME books isn't going to change the narrative. Now, when I did Jasmine Falling, it was published in 2015, so the landscape looked even more different than it does now. And actually, that was a learning journey for me, because I came back from traveling. I submitted my books to British agents and publishers, and the reply was, we love it, but we don't understand your character. Could you change the character from being Palestinian? And we don't understand your audience, because the faith throughout the book was Islam. And that for me really sort of started my journey into Muslim representation, because I couldn't understand why books that I wrote for a wide audience, in a way to almost break down these barriers of how the West frames the East, to then be told that it's only sort of niche for Muslims, was actually a bit of a shock, because that wasn't why I wrote it. I wrote it for everybody, to understand these things in a different way. So I began to sort of research for Muslim Media Watch, and I don't know if the viewers will be surprised, but the representation of Muslim women across the media is very homogenous. It's almost as though there's one image of a Muslim woman, and what I was saying to myself is, we don't exist on the sidelines. You know, the women that I've met, I mean, after we stayed in Palestine, my husband and I, we stayed living throughout the Middle East for 10 years. The Muslim women that I know, we don't exist as this one figure that's represented over and over again through worldwide media. So it's a huge issue. And if you look back at even Orientalism, you know, this is how the West has framed the East, and there's a lot of work to do to actually erode those stereotypes.
Yeah, I promise you we've got loads of questions around representation and some of the other works which we're going to cover in the sort of final segment after this one. But a real sense of, what was the reaction from your family when you did your first book? What did Mum say?
Well, it was the best book ever. So I knew that.
As mothers always say.
Exactly. Never give it to your mum to read for an honest opinion. No, they loved it. And actually, my mum spent a lot of time in Palestine when she was younger with my dad. And she said, I just felt transported back there. And it was almost a journey for all of us. And the support's been incredible, especially from my Palestinian family, because there are works in Arabic and my work is all in English. They really appreciate it. They really appreciate that you are telling stories about Palestine and trying to get, the narrative out there.
Yeah, in a way that people can understand and relate to, which I think you might possibly not get in a news item or a discussion than you would instead in a novel. And what about the children?
My children or my children's books?
Yeah, but the very idea that there's a book here with your name on it and it's been published, that must get them excited.
Yes, I mean, predominantly they were for grown-ups, but then I released The Girl Who Slept Under the Moon, and I've actually got my son's copy just here. He let me borrow it for this, which is very nice of him. They're my biggest critics, honestly. But the great thing is that, as I said when we opened the show, the reason I write is to capture a history that is being eroded incredibly quickly under occupation, a lot faster than it is in any other circumstance, like what we have in Palestine. And these stories are their stories. They're the stories of their heritage, of their grandparents, of their great-grandparents. And as we lose members of our family, their stories go, especially with a tradition of oral storytelling. So when I write my books, I write with them in mind, because it's their heritage, and I'm really interested in who's going to be writing that narrative and what they're going to inherit, because each time we return to Palestine, the country's changed. So there is an urgency about capturing that history for the younger generations.
Yeah, and then you look at, I suppose, out there, as I said, when you go into when you go into a bookshop, the sense of how do you find authors like yourself and your books, they're probably somewhere right at the back, aren't they? And that in itself is kind of part of the mission, because I don't know, when I reflect on Black Lives Matter and the brutal murder of George Floyd last year, and there was a kind of an outpouring of reflection. Do you think that in the writing field that happened as well?
I think it's filtering down, but it's a lot slower. And I think what we've got to remember is that publishing is an industry, and it's not completely without. I mean, you have 4 to 5 major publishers, so they publish 5 books a year. So you have a very limited scope there of works getting down. I mean, my novel, The Tower, Beacon Books completely understood what I was trying to do with The Tower. But the readers, as with Jasmine Falling, they're the ones who discovered it, the librarians, the school teachers, and they've actually sort of passed that down, and it's actually now being taught in colleges and schools. It's also set academic text at an American university. And this isn't from bookshops, this is from readers. This is from people who read the book and say, these are perspectives and these are issues that we need our children to be reading, our youth to be reading, our adults to be reading. And I think now that we have social media, we have platforms where a lot slower, but our voices can reach a different audience. And that should be really exciting for people who've got something different to say. Yeah.
And when you've also studied, as I said in the introduction, representation of Muslim women in the wider media. What sort of things did you discover as part of your research on that?
Well, I mean, it was actually really hard. It was non-fiction. So you had the element of it being news, and you had to have a look at the stories that were coming out, and you had to critique them in a way that would reveal any bias. And that actually wasn't a very difficult thing to do for a lot of the stories, which was very frustrating. And you get to hear a lot of things behind the scenes, such as, contracts that are offered to people outside of outside of the Muslim community where it's another editor working on a project, but or women who aren't getting a voice, or one particular image of a Muslim woman across the pages whenever there's a story about Muslim women. And what that does is that creates, as I said before, a very repetitive image, and it almost pushes Muslim women to the sidelines in the media. And that isn't really what I saw. It's not what I saw at all throughout the Middle East, throughout the UK. And it's a huge issue, and we have to ask ourselves why these narratives come out on top. You know, everyone in media has an agenda. Every publisher or books that are out that reinforce stereotypes, there is a bigger reason behind that. So I think just be aware when you're having a look at those things and actively seek other types of work.
Yeah, and you've also, as well as being a novelist, you've written for some of the very important blogs and websites, including the Middle East Eye, but also you refer to the World Literature Today magazine, historic edition, I think, which is a really important moment, I think, for Palestinian for cause. Wow, what an achievement!
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
You did sort of the novel things, the fiction, but you also do really well on the non-fiction, if I may say so.
Yeah, I mean, I think with writing, when you find what it is you're passionate about, you become very invested in it. And that then impacts lots of different areas of your life. So now I do talk to people on Muslim representation. I will do the sort of more formal side of it, as well as doing my fiction novels, because, as I said, if you're very interested in a particular subject, then it will impact your life. And as I was in the Middle East, I have a perspective which crosses, which I often say straddles the East and West. And it's very infuriating when you've seen such beauty, such empowerment from Islam, and then you see it completely misrepresented in the same old, very, very tired stereotypes and tropes. And, you know, it becomes frustrating and you want to break that. And that's why I add my books onto the bookshelf for a more refreshing, authentic perspective. And actually a notable academic said that the Tower is how you write outside of Orientalism. And it's the truest way that we write about lived Muslim realities without pandering to stereotypes. So it shows that, you know, people do understand it and see it differently. But I think in order to write about something, you need to really understand it. And that's where my sort of non-fiction work really does impact my novels.
Yeah, that's really important. We're going to take our final break. Wow, I've just enjoyed our conversation. Just reached out. It was 9 o'clock when we started. It's already 9:41 here in the studio for our last segment with you, Shereen. But yeah, let's give you that update tonight on Afghanistan. The UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has been appearing in front of MPs at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He announced that whilst he hadn't spoken to the Pakistani and Afghan foreign ministers in the 6 months leading up to this crisis, he is tonight on its way to the region. He will travel to Pakistan and other countries in the region to try to find and formulate an international response to the Taliban now taking control of Afghanistan. And the Taliban have announced that they will be forming a government, which will be announced in the next few days, with their supreme leader being appointed as a spiritual leader, very much on the Iranian setup. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on that story as well. I mean, we had a question come in on WhatsApp, which was quite a few similar questions, so we'll group them together. One was, how long did it take you to get your first book published?
Well, my first book took about 4 years, if not longer, because in the end we took creative control and I independently published it because I wasn't willing to change any of the characters. Since then, on average now, probably 1 to 2 years now I have a publisher. It's a lot quicker.
Yeah, and then the second question's around what sort of barriers did you encounter? I know you've gone through about the changing the narrative, but what other barriers have you faced in trying to get those books published? And when we come back after the break, we'll take some of your questions. Like the question we just got up on WhatsApp, which says, how long did it take to get your first book published? And what were the barriers? First, we'll take our final break. The final countdown to the end of the show. Join us on the other side of the Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. Do you know what I really love about this program? I love about British Muslim TV is that, and my guest, is they have such fascinating insight and stories that I get totally consumed by them and then realise that we're coming to the end of the program. And we're in the final segment. My special guest is Shireen Malherbe, who's a British Palestinian writer and novelist. And she's been really fascinating discussion with her.
I think a lot of it is your own barriers, your own expectations, your own sort of want for other people to say that your work's good enough. And sometimes I don't think you get that in writing. So I think just be confident in what you want to say, learn and study the technical aspects of writing, and know when it's ready to get out there in the world yourself.
Yeah. There's a question here around your husband. I mean, it sounds like, listening to the conversation, he's been very supportive and a key part of your life and your successes. Tell us a bit about him and his involvement in supporting you.
Yes, he's always been very supportive. Even from my first book, it was actually my husband who said to me, okay, enough is enough. It's not going to be on your laptop anymore. We're going to publish this and we're going to put it out there in the world. So he was fundamentally key in actually publishing the first novel. And it was actually so great that we did get it out there, because the response has been fantastic and actually led to my publishing contract. So absolutely very supportive and very hands-on actually with the first novel, or it may never have come out.
Well, we salute you, Mr. Husband, Mr. Shereen, as we might describe him. What tips can you give to aspiring writers who want to join the industry?
Be unique. There is stories that only you can tell. So find out what they are and what really drives your passion and write that. Don't try and copy market trends or try and write for other people. They're very long projects. So choose something that you're so passionate about that you'd write no matter what.
And then there's, well, I promise you we'll get through as many of these, but there is quite a few coming through. You love reading. What other recommendations do you have for our viewers, apart from your own books, obviously?
Just read widely. I don't like to ever, shorten what people read. Read widely, read short stories, read magazines, read world literature. My latest story is a retelling of Jane Eyre. That's very classic literature. So, just keep reading, and also non-fiction texts as well. I mean, everything that you read contributes to how you write.
Yeah. What would you say are your values that drive you and inspire you in your writing as well?
Well, I mean, if we go back to the reason that I did a Palestinian reimagining of Jane Eyre, when I was studying for my literature degree, we studied Austen, the Bronte sisters, as a discovery of Victorian Britain in the 19th century, and their books are steeped in Christian theology. And for me, when I write with books steeped in Islamic theology, it becomes pigeonholed to a smaller audience. But the success of these books isn't based on their theology. It's actually on what they're capturing. And I think removing that spiritual element, be it Christian theology or Muslim theology, which is what I write, these add to the essence of being human. So I keep spirituality in my books because I think it's a key part of being human and how characters make decisions. So for me, it would be the quieter voices that I'm interested in, and writing from an Islamic perspective.
And how is this question coming through on Twitter? How has the pandemic impacted you in terms of as being a writer? I know musicians obviously not been performing in stadiums and things like that. I mean, obviously, book writing, traveling, literature festivals, things like that. Has that sort of changed?
Yeah, I mean, we've just seen a huge shift online. So I wouldn't say that it did slow down for a period, but then it was very quickly picked up with online events, which was great because you could still give advice. It doesn't feel as social as it did going to events. It's always amazing meeting new writers and giving advice and doing book signings. But I think for writers especially, it may have been perhaps a little bit easier because the shift went online.
Yeah, and how do you see that changing now, or we're going to go to a hybrid sort of structure going forward?
Well, I mean, Stephen King himself said he couldn't sell out a stadium. Don't quote me on that. I just read it somewhere. But, you know, I think that if you have an online presence, you know, most of my book club meetings now are online. And actually, you know, a lot of it is easier. Will there still be local events that I'd love to do? Yes, definitely. So I think it's probably, like you said, a mixture of the two.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just get through some of these questions. I promise. We've got about 5-6 minutes left of the program. Tell us your latest book. When does that come out, and when can people expect to be able to purchase it?
Okay, well, you can pre-order it from today. So
wow, from today?
Yeah, we actually tied it in with this launch. So, yes, it's
we love you.
Live on British Muslim TV first. So the cover reveal is now out. And you can actually pre-order the book now from either my website, ShereenMalherbe.com, or through the publisher's Beacon Books. So you can pre-order it, and it will be out this winter, inshallah.
Yeah, this coming Wednesday, a week today. And you don't actually get to see what the impact is instantly, do you? Or do you, in terms of how much books you sell? Or is that a wider timeline?
Yeah, it comes later. I mean, with the tower, we'd done the launch. It had been sort of 6 months down the line, and my publisher received an email saying that it was set academic text at a university in America. Oh. Those are the kind of emails you don't really expect to get, and they come through at those times. So that's the great thing about it. I've just done a book club with a group of sisters who have just read Jasmine Falling, and all of that is new to them. So I think that is one of the great things about books. They don't have a sell-by date on, and the news from it can come at any time.
And there's one really powerful question I've got here from Ali. He talks about legacy, and he says, as an author, as a novelist, you might have your books that will live on long after you've gone from the world. What do you think, what sort of legacy do you want to leave the world?
Well, I mean, I think if again, I go back to what we look at now when we're studying literature, and we're looking at 19th century Victorian Britain, and they are fiction novels, yet we're studying them to have a snapshot of life in Britain at that time. And that's really what I'm trying to do with my novels. The Tower is UK based. My other books are based in Palestine. So what I would like is that snapshot captured in that moment exactly as we see it.
Yeah. And when you look at this industry and all the struggles that you've had and the barriers and the challenges you've faced in your career so far, what do you want the industry to now do to change for future women writers and Muslim writers?
Yeah, well, I think if you have something to say and you feel it's authentic, then stick to it. So many young writers, when approached by editors, say, you know, if you change this element of your book, then we'll publish it. And I think really knowing why you're writing and staying true to yourself and really questioning those decisions is absolutely key. I actually did pull one of my short stories from a major publisher because of the editing slant on it. So I think it's really, even though it's very difficult as an aspiring writer to have confidence, be really clear about what message it is you're trying to say, and just be really wary of the editing on that. And be confident. If you feel that you've got something to say and other people in the industry don't understand it yet, there are other platforms where you can publish. Yeah,
my final question. Lots of people really, I can't really go through all the messages tonight, really just praising you and singing your praise and just thanking you for coming on and everything you've done. What would you say to young girls watching this at home who might feel interested in getting involved in the industry?
Yes, I mean, you know, the future is with our youth, which is why, you know, I do books that are suitable for colleges as well. And if you want to write and you have things to say, then you're growing up in a generation where you can create your own following, you can create your own groups of readers. So learn your craft, learn the technical aspects of writing, read a lot, approach it with discipline, and get your work out there when you think it's ready.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you back to the programme. I'm sure you have an exciting new book launch. The book is titled The Land Beneath the Light and will be out next Wednesday. You can pre-order from today. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shireen. I really, really found it awesome tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And best wishes to you and the family.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for inspiring us, and really fascinating discussion there. That was Shireen Malherbe from Leicester, the novelist, with her new book. As I said, it's out now for pre-order. You can get that from most bookshops, and I'm sure online as well. We've reached the end of the programme. Dun, 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 as they say. It flies by each week. Thank you to my guest tonight, Dr. Waheed, Arian. Really powerful, two powerful stories which we can reflect on of success. Dr. Waheed coming to this country with nothing, excelling in his A-levels, going on to Cambridge University, and now serving the British people in the NHS, and also not forgetting his roots and helping the poor, needy people with medical support around the world. And then, as we just heard, a powerful story from the novelist Shireen Malherbe, whose new book is out. Now, next week, we've got something really, really special. As we talk about Pakistan being on the red list and the aftermath of those decision-making, we'll be in Manchester live at the Pakistan Consulate in Manchester. And we'll be talking to the Consular General, Tariq Wazir, live in Manchester. He'll be with us for the whole programme. I'm really excited to go out into the field, out into the communities of the UK. Thank you so much to Annabelle and James behind the scenes, who've made me look so fantastic and the programme run so smoothly. Thank you to all of you for your messages, your comments, and apologies if we weren't able to get through them. Take care of yourself and each other. We'll see you next week live in the great city of Manchester. Have a great evening. Have a great weekend. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.